Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. After 42-year-old Halyna Hutchins died, authorities seized and searched the Rust cinematographer's phone. A search of Halyna's phone found conversations about the production going back to July 14th, 3 months prior to the shooting, according to the affidavit. In the context of the authorities issuing a warrant to search Baldwin's phone and everything in it, that's text, email, social media, GPS coordinates, one must bear in mind Baldwin deleted his verified Twitter account earlier this month, not long after his ABC interview aired. That was about 2 weeks ago. I think there's a very real possibility that the information they may be looking for may be deleted, as we saw in the Chris Watts case, the Morphew case, and the Summer Wells case. In the Gabby Petito case, we saw social media posts altered or disappear entirely, and eventually Brian Laundrie's Instagram disappeared as well. The search warrant specifically refers to the fact that Baldwin told the cops he exchanged emails with the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, on what sort of gun he wanted to use in the film. So through the rest of this episode, we are going to go through some of the highlights from the warrant. It's quite a few pages, but we're only going to go through the highlights and look at what this new information means for the investigation into Alec Baldwin and the Rush shooting. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So the search warrant provides the exact time that the 911 call came in, 13:48. It's just sort of fine-tuning what we already knew. We knew that the call came in about 20 minutes after lunch. Well, now we know it's 18 minutes. I do find it quite interesting. Maybe it's just a coincidence that all of this information is coming to light. In fact, this is how the affidavit starts, how the warrant starts, is talking about the 911 call. And that was the video that I put up yesterday. So it seems like the warrant came out within, I don't know, almost simultaneously or within hours of that particular video. I think it's also interesting that Mamie Mitchell claimed Halyna was shot using a prop gun. Was it a prop gun? And you might say whether it was a genuine Colt 45 or not, it's still a prop gun. But I think there's a world of difference between a replica representing something and the genuine article, or something that is more of a genuine product than kind of a knockoff. There's a big difference. The value of the actual artifact is totally different. You wouldn't think anything of wearing down the firing mechanism of a prop.
I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never. Never. That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at me and pull the trigger. On day one of my instruction in this business, people said to me, never take a gun and go click, 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 because even though it's incremental, you damage the firing pin on the gun if you do that. Don't do that.
But you wouldn't think of wearing down the firing mechanism of a useless, worthless knockoff compared to something that is almost like a museum piece, right? Something that is closer to the genuine article. I just think it's quite important to be sure what we're talking about, because this was something that Baldwin specifically asked for. He specifically asked for a specific kind of gun. And I mean, that is often how a cowboy is, you know, how badass he is determined by how badass his gun is, right? That's almost like Cowboy 101. And so from the affidavit, this is quite an interesting quote from early on. During Hannah's interview, she said the morning of the incident, that's the 21st of October, she got to work and got the guns out. That's guns plural. She advised her co-worker, Sarah Zachary, that she helped her out with the morning tasks. Hannah advised after they retrieved the guns, they took them to set. Hannah said while on set, she dummied the guns up with dummy rounds. Hannah stated they got on set around 7:30 in the morning, but didn't dummy the gun up until a short time before lunch. And so obviously the events around that lunch break, that last lunch break, That's a critical period. Something else that comes out in the warrant is the timestamp 12 minutes past 5 or 17:12. And that is when Baldwin was in the interview room talking to detectives. During his interview with ABC, if you recall, he said that he was told 45 minutes to an hour later what had happened to Halyna. And I understood this to be at the end of the questioning, that he sort of said, at the end of his interview with the police, they told him, kind of what had happened, that a slug had been removed.
When she finally left, I don't know how long it was. She was there 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It seemed like a very long time. But they kept saying, well, she's stable. Like nobody, just as you disbelieved that there was a live round in the gun, you disbelieved that this was going to be a fatal accident. At the very end of my interview with the sheriff's department, they said to me, we regret to tell you that she didn't make it, she died. They told me right then and there. And that's when I went in the parking lot and called my wife to talk to my wife. And finally, one of the police officers, at the conclusion of my interview, I was there for like an hour and a half or so, she takes her phone and she slides it across to me. She says, that's what came out of Joel's shoulder, a .45 caliber slug. It was a real bullet. No one had any idea until that police officer, that sheriff's officer, said to me, this is the slug, .45 caliber slug they took out of Joel's arm.
I do find it interesting that he says, in a sort of a global sense, in a sort of macro general sense, nobody had any idea, speaking for the entire crew, what could have happened hours later. Well, surely some people had an idea almost immediately afterwards. I mean, Serge knew immediately while he was holding her what had happened. I think the director also knew. So that seems kind of a strange statement. We will deal with statement analysis later. I have gone through what he said here, and he doesn't say something like, 45 minutes later they spoke with the police. He does say it was until hours later. But if you actually take the letter of the affidavit, that the interview started at 17:12, and he said they spoke for about an hour and a half, then that means at about 7 p.m. and one assumes the sun would have gone down around about that time. And if you look at the photo of him doubled over, it looks like the sun is already absent. It's already twilight. And so as it happens, that photo must have been taken very close to sunset. Sunset on the 21st of October was 20 minutes past 6. So around about an hour after his interview with the police started that day. I just think it's interesting that I certainly got the impression from his interview with ABC that he was told 45 minutes to an hour later, but it's actually many hours later that he apparently found out what had really happened. The longer the period, the more unbelievable it is, because you would imagine most people would have assumed that within seconds of what had happened to Halyna, especially if you're standing right there, especially if you had that gunpowder residue on you, the gun is smoking, you've heard the sound, it would be the first thought, not the last thought. And that is what he conveys in the interview, that it was the last thing anyone thought. It was the last thing everyone thought. Is that true? So he only spoke formally to the cops more than 3 hours after the incident. But it's unclear whether Halyna was still alive at that particular point. He does say during that interview that I think during his interview Halyna must have died. Still, that particular point in time isn't clarified. We don't know exactly what time she died. I certainly don't know. If you do know, leave that timestamp in the comments. I'll deal with Hannah, not to be confused with Halyna. Hannah Gutierrez Reed, the armorer's. I'll read the armorer's narrative in more detail in an episode following this one, because there's quite a lot of information about her in the warrant. Now, in terms of the phone data, GPS data may prove surprisingly revealing in terms of Baldwin's actual movements prior to the incident and just after. Where did he go in those hours? Where was he? Also, did Baldwin make any calls or send any messages during the hour-long lunch break? If he did, what is the tone of those messages? What kind of mood was he in? What kind of mood were other people in that responded? Did he talk to anyone about how he wanted the production to go in terms of text messages? Perhaps he wanted things to go in a new direction. Perhaps he wanted it to be more aggressive, more urgent, more visceral, right? And is that what was discussed during the critical last lunch? What were the revisions that were asked for? Whose idea was it? So from the affidavit it says, affiant believes there may be evidence on the phone due to individuals using cellular phones during and or after the commission of crimes, right? And so I think it's quite interesting the fact that there are actually photos of Baldwin using his phone at least on 2 occasions. The one is immediately after the incident, standing outside the church, and the other one is outside the police station hours later. Were there any other cell phone calls? And so that is going to be very interesting if some information can be retrieved. You can see that the authorities have already taken the position that a crime has been committed, right? If you take the letter of the affidavit, during or after the commission of crimes. So the question is whether it's a civil offense or criminal. If there has been obstruction of justice, it could certainly push the pendulum more towards the criminal side. Then also from the affidavit, quote, the search warrant also allows police to download Baldwin's images, social network accounts, private messages, and deleted files like images, messages, and browser history. Actually, I don't think that is from the affidavits, from a news article quoting the contents of the affidavit. I'm not 100% sure if the search warrant entitles authorities to go to the service provider if files have been removed from the phone, as we saw in the Watts case with Nicole Kessinger, but one would imagine it would. Then going further, quote, the affiant was also made aware there were several emails and text messages sent and received regarding the movie production Rust in the course of interviews, end quote. The question is, to whom were these emails sent? To whom were the text messages sent? If anything, I must say, I find it surprising the authorities have taken this long to act on the cell phone records. The cell phone has been in Baldwin's possession for almost 2 months since the incident. If certain information is retrieved, it's possible we may get an idea of the tone and level of tension going into the production. And you may not think much of that. You may not think the tension or stress is a big deal because it's not you experiencing that tension. It's not you in the situation having all these balls to juggle. And so someone else's social symbolism, social death, social scenario means nothing to you. But of course, yours means a lot to you. Your interactions with people on your social media means a lot to you, whereas someone else's on theirs doesn't mean that much to you. So I do think this is going to turn out to be an important factor in this case. Is this the tone going on between the crew members, the level of actual tension going on between the crew members, especially on that day? How did folks communicate over the phone? Was there swearing? Was it civil? Was it reckless? Was it nasty? How did they resolve differences or disputes? More in particular, how did Baldwin resolve them? Was any mention made of safety during these interactions on the phone? Importantly, if there was correspondence on Halyna's phone with Baldwin, but not on Baldwin's phone, where does that take the investigation? In the Chris Watts case, and this is again an intertextual aspect, we had precisely this situation. There was plenty of evidence on the victim's phone, on Shanann Watts' phone, of interactions, of what was going on, of what was being said. And the victim's phone wasn't easily retrieved. It was actually found almost serendipitously by a guy who is a friend of the victim, a teenager, Nicholas Atkinson. A young kid was running around the crime scene. He happened to stumble upon this phone hidden under the cushions on the couch. This is the Chris Watts case, in the upstairs loft. And it was because they could retrieve, because they had access to Shanann Watts' phone, that they could see what was on it. They could see the perpetrator's messages to her and obviously hers to him. However, almost his entire call history over the relevant period was missing. Texts, messages, everything. He also had deleted his Facebook page a few days earlier. And so one wonders what is going to be the situation with the matching of correspondence between Halyna's phone and Baldwin's phone. What conversations are going to be on Halyna's phone but not on Baldwin's phone? That's certainly going to be an interesting issue to find out. As mentioned, so I'm not going to take it further than that. As mentioned earlier, I will deal with Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer's narrative, in other words, in more detail in an episode following this one. There's quite a lot of detail on her for the first time in this affidavit. So we'll look into that in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.